So welcome everyone to this webinar on measuring vegetation structure with airborne LiDAR. We will have this webinar in the next hour, and I would like to introduce briefly the speakers. My name is Daniel Kistling. I'm an associate professor at the University of Amsterdam. I have a special interest in ecology and biodiversity science, and in the context of LiDAR in ecological applications of LiDAR. We have also today Yifang Shi. She's an assistant professor in land cover and land use dynamics. She's especially interested in multi-source remote sensing. And we have Jinhu Wang, who's a LiDAR scientific developer. He works specifically with point clouds and 3D object detection. All the three of us are working at the Biodiversity and Macroecology Lab at the University of Amsterdam in the Institute for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Dynamics. This webinar is held today in the context of the EU project MAMBO. MAMBO is a project that focuses on modern approaches to the monitoring of biodiversity. And there's a range of techniques covered by this project. We are particular part of work package 4 on remote sensing for habitat assessment. And our particular task is to focus on habitat condition metrics from airborne LiDAR and to develop automated workflows for habitat condition assessment. Today we have a program of 5 short talks. I will start with the introduction, then we will have a short talk on individual tree mapping, on mapping 3D vegetation structures, then on trail networks of large herbivores, and then I'll provide a wrap-up with available resources and so on. So I'll start with this introduction. This is a very brief introduction into airborne laser scanning. Airborne laser scanning, also known as LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, is an active remote sensing technique. That means there's a laser scanning on board of a platform, like an airplane, and this sends out a pulse of laser light that is actively emitted by this scanner. The return time of this laser pulse can be measured and converted into a distance because we know the speed of the laser beam. And this results in returns points from the objects on the ground, and each point is characterized by an X, Y, and a Z coordinate. And if we compile these points together, we get what we call a point cloud. And here is an example of a point cloud from a forest where the points are colored by height. So the red are the highest points and the bluish are the lowest points. Now, LiDAR sensors can be mounted on different platforms. So for instance, on ground-based platforms, such as mobile laser scanners and terrestrial laser scanners. So mobile laser scanners, you can walk around. A terrestrial laser scanner is mounted on a tripod and fixed. We also can distinguish then aerial LiDAR platforms. So for instance, drones like unmanned aerial vehicles or crewed aircraft. And this is typically then called airborne laser scanning. Now, these platforms and the sensors differ in what they record, and there's a few general characteristics that I would like to highlight. So first of all, the point densities of these ground-based LiDAR platforms are typically much, much higher. So you can have thousands or 10,000s of points per square meter. For the aerial platforms, this ranges typically for hundreds or thousands of points. In the case of airborne laser scanning, typically this is 10 to 20 points per square meter. If you have a ground-based platform, you typically only cover small areas or localized plots, and you typically measure from the ground upwards. So that means the ground level in the understory is very well covered, but usually the top canopy, for instance, of trees is poorly represented. In the aerial LiDAR platforms, you can cover much larger areas. So for instance, small nature reserves, or in the case of airborne laser scanning, whole countries. And you have to realize that the scanning is from top down. So you have a very good representation of the canopy, of the top canopy. You also have some representation of understory and terrain, but typically much less dense. So we focus today mostly on airborne laser scanning. And here's a few examples of airborne laser scanning point clouds from different habitats. On the left, you can see examples from forest, shrubland, and grassland. The points here are colored again by height, and you see that in the forest you have much more information available. For shrubs, you also have quite a bit of information, but for grasslands, it's often difficult to distinguish, for instance, individual trees, individual grasses, and it is also much harder to actually differentiate the ground level from low vegetation. On the right hand, you see examples from dunes and a rural landscape. Here, the difference is that these points are colored by a class that was already available. In the upper one, you see ground points colored in red and shrubs in a dune land colored in blue. And in the rural landscape, you see vegetation points, ground points, and building points. And that leads already to a characteristic that is often available in these point clouds, in these airborne laser scanning point clouds. That is a pre-classification that was done typically by the data provider. And there is a standard, the ASPRS standard, that allows to specify particular classes. How this classification is done is often not very precisely documented. And there's also a lot of uncertainties in those classifications, but they can help a lot in dealing with the point cloud. So this is an example of a pre-classification of a point cloud from a Natura 2000 site. The dataset is the fourth airborne laser scanning dataset from the Netherlands. And what you see is basically the points colored by classes. So ground is in green. The building, for instance, here on the left is in yellow. You see a power line in red. You see a water body. But the large majority of the points is classified as unclassified. And this covers to a large extent vegetation. So all of these are trees. But here is also a highway. And some of the information, for instance, on the trucks, on the cars, on the traffic signs, but also, for instance, transmission towers are also included in the unclassified class. So if you use this as vegetation, there can be some biases and uncertainties in using this. So you have to deal with these uncertainties as well. If we look across national open access airborne laser scanning point clouds in Europe, so collecting all the information that is available, you will see that most of these point clouds have at least information on unclassified and ground available. Many of them have also information on some vegetation, so low, medium, high vegetation classes. Some have also building, noise, and water, but all other classes are often rarely represented. If we look at the geographic coverage across Europe for open access national or subnational point clouds, you will see that many countries have data available, but often not with a full coverage across the whole country. These are the orange countries here, but in red are illustrated countries that have at least one full coverage of the country. This includes Spain, for instance, the Netherlands, Poland, some of the Nordic countries. Now, if you look within a country, you can have also multiple surveys. So this is an example where we are quite lucky in the Netherlands. Here are multi-temporal national ALS points cloud available now by 4 to 5 surveys, and the 6th survey is coming up. The colors that you see here is different parts of the country flown in different years. So typically it is not possible to cover the whole country in just 1 year. So now they typically take 2 to 3 years to cover the whole country. Now, one very important characteristic of these point clouds is the point density. Point density can be very low. That can be, for instance, 1, 2 points per square meter, or it can be quite high. So let's say 10, 15, 20, 30 points per square meter on average in a national airborne laser scanning data set. If we look across average point densities for these available open access LS point clouds in Europe, we typically have on average something between 5 and 20 points per square meter available. And this is good and sufficient to characterize a lot of the vegetation. Now, point densities also vary within a data set, not only across data sets, but also within data sets, not only because there are different habitats like forest and non-forest, but also because flight lines are partly overlapping. So the red areas here, you see largely areas where flight lines are overlapping. So if we zoom in into the smaller part in the south of the Netherlands, you will see that a lot of the higher density of points is actually associated with flight lines that are overlapping. And you see this also here in a very nice zoom in, that here is a flight line, here's a flight line, and in between you have much higher point densities because the data are recorded from both sides of the flight line. So you also need to deal with these different point densities when you analyze point clouds. Another key aspect is the acquisition time. So the leave on and leave off season. So if you collect the data in the leaf-on season, so in the summer period, you have typically a lot of points from the upper canopy layer, but less points in the lower canopy and the lower layers and on the ground. In contrast, if you look at the leaf-off season, typically you have less points in the upper canopy and more points in the understory and on the ground. And most of the point clouds that are available open access in Europe are flown in the leaf-off season. And the reason for this is that they are mostly collected for terrain mapping, digital terrain mapping instead of vegetation. If we think about processing LiDAR data, there's different ways of how you can do this. I want to illustrate briefly three approaches. I distinguish the area-based approach. So you look here now on a point cloud from the top, and you can put a grid or any other area across the point cloud and calculate some statistical metrics within these grid cells. It cannot only be grid cells. You can also think, for instance, about polygons from nature reserves. You can think about points and a radius around, or transects that have been done with, for instance, bird or butterfly surveys. Another way you can analyze the point cloud is to look at voxels, so 3D cubes, and basically calculate properties for each of those cubes. An example is here, for instance, calculating information for trees in different heights and different levels. And the last one I want to emphasize is basically an object-based approach where you use the point cloud and you derive objects. These objects here, for instance, in this image are individual trees, but they can be also not only trees, they can be also other landscape elements such as hedges, stone walls, or anything else you are interested. So this was a very short introduction into the airborne laser scanning, and I hand now over to Jin-Hu, who talks about individual trees. So Jin-Hu, please go ahead.
Please unmute, Jin-Hu.
You're still unmuted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My name is Jin-Hu Wang, and my first topic is tree individualization with airborne LiDAR data. So understanding large-scale forest ecosystem for everything from climate change modeling to sustainable logging all begins with accurate metrics of individual trees, such as the tree height, crown size, canopy height, and basal area, and etc. Those metrics are the fundamental building blocks for understanding large-scale forest ecosystem. And traditionally, those information were gathered through manual field inventories. This process is incredibly expensive, inefficient, and labor-intensive. It is simply not feasible for surveying vast or remote forest areas regularly. This limitation creates a need for a more efficient and scalable solution. This is where modern remote sensing technique, especially airborne LiDAR, are widely applied nowadays for such applications. As already introduced by Daniel, airborne LiDAR emits laser beams and reflects off the canopy and the ground, allowing us to acquire detailed and precise 3D point cloud datasets for forest structure. And advantages of this approach are significant. It allows us to capture detailed 3D structure of forest, surveying vast and remote areas quickly, and reduce field work and labor costs, and also produce data that is consistent and repeatable over time. And the first figure shows a top view of point cloud data of a forest plot of 100 meter by 100 meter. On the right side is a top view of this plot forest with all trees are individualized. And to give a better knowledge for the airborne LiDAR data of forests, here are three real examples from different forests in Europe. With the Vanya is in Poland, and Silkvaskøy in Denmark, and Veluwe in the Netherlands. For each of these locations, you can see the top view and the side view profile. What is important to notice here is the diversity of the forest. The Poland forest and the Dutch forest are quite dense, multi-layered, and old-growth forest. which look very different from the more structured and less dense forest. Those variables of forest properties pose a key challenge for any single algorithm aiming to extract individual tree information accurately across different forest types. This brings us to the different algorithmic approaches, which can roughly categorized into three major groups. The first one is the geometric or rule-based methods. These are the most traditional computational methods. They apply spatial or morphological rules based on our general understanding of what a tree looks like. For example, on the right shows a canopy height model with a watershed algorithm. It regards a forest canopy as an inverted landscape where each treetop is a peak, and the algorithm finds the valley or the boundaries between them. And the proofs of those approaches are that it is computationally efficient and the logic is very interpretable. But those methods struggle in dense forest with overlapping crops, and they have difficulty with irregular shaped trees. They often fail to detect understory trees, and they are also highly sensitive to parameter tuning. A second category is clustering-based methods. Instead of defining explicit rules about the tree shapes, those methods group points or voxels based on similarity or distance-based metrics. The goal is to have each resulting cluster represent as an individual tree, such as k-means or dbScan-based methods, which group points based on Euclidean distance and point densities. The graph-based methods model the tree points or superpoints by graph data structure, and then graph card algorithm can be applied to those data structure to individualize trees. And the pros here is that these methods are more flexible and require less prior knowledge about the exact shape of trees. But the cons that they can be very sensitive to thresholds, for instance, like how close the points needs to be belong to the same cluster. And this makes it difficult to find the optimal clusters corresponds to real-world trees, especially in complex forest environments. For the third group is most modern approaches called machine learning based. Especially deep convolutional network were employed to learn the complex features of tree directly from large amount of training data sets. Especially instead of manual crafting rules or criteria, we train the model with thousands of examples, and it learns to identify individual trees, such as like the tree-learn algorithm and the segment any tree model. But the pros of those methods can be very powerful. They typically aid models and can achieve high accuracy when trained on the sufficient and high quality annotated data. But the drawbacks are significant as well. Those methods require substantial training datasets and significant computational resources. They are often less interpretable and especially lack of annotated airborne LiDAR data for training. So for now that we discussed the general categories of methods, let's see a specific methodology, which is entitled as tree individualization, use voxel clustering and adjacency analysis, which is actually a hybrid of shape-based method and clustering-based method. This approach consists of 4 major steps. We start with the original raw 3D point cloud of trees. At this stage, it's just an unstructured collection of discrete points. So the next step is using these discrete points were resampled to voxels using this voxel data structure. This voxel has 3 dimensions, so each dimension can be adjustable according to different applications. So the voxelization of those points keeps voxel where they have points within, and the empty points was noted as negative voxels. Then the next step is to clustering those voxels based on the voxel phase connectivity. for the left figure, it shows the top view of the phase adjacency voxels. In green, they are all phase adjacency, and in green and red, they don't have phase adjacency. So you can see also from the right side is a vertical side view. Then the next step is to have vertical slicing, traversing. We traverse from top layer downwards. For example, from left figure, you can see for tree S1 and tree S2, at the top layers, the top 4 layers, they are almost separated as already, but on the 5th layer, they are just mixed. So especially for those pixels or voxel in the middle, we introduced an adjacency coefficient to determine which tree this exact voxel will be assigned to. The next is to compute the adjacency coefficient. So, for example, on the top right subfigure, you can see the computed coefficient of each voxel is computed. And the next step is to assign this voxel to trees which have the largest coefficient. The next step is to assign the points in voxels to trees. So since we already assigned the voxel to each tree, but the points inside of this voxel are not. So these steps to assign points to different trees. So let's see. Show the visual results. The top row are the top view and the side view of the airborne LiDAR point cloud for a forest patch, which is the input, and those points are categorized by height from red to blue. And the lower row are the top view and side view of the individualized trees of this forest patch. And to validate the workflow, a total of 20 patches of different forests were selected and manually labeled each point to a unique tree. For the figure, the original column shows the raw data sets, and the ground truth column shows the manually annotated ground truth data, and random colors were assigned to each manually annotated individual tree, and the results column shows the output of this workflow. Across all the 20 tested patches, this workflow achieved an overall accuracy of 81%. And to dig deeper, we characterized the 20 patches into easy, medium, and hard categories based on factors like tree density, canopy size, and also tree species. Like for easy patches, it reached around 80%, and for medium, it's around 80%, and for hard cases, it's around 75%. And the source code and the data are public available. And to conclude, I would say a airborne LiDAR point cloud allows to delineate individual trees, and the point density and tree species identity can be influenced the accuracy of the tree individualization. For individualization is challenging for dense and mixed species forest, especially where varying tree species and size usually cause commissions, and fewer points obtained from understory trees. Those may typically lead to omissions. For the future work, we will say we will extract the individual tree metrics, for example, the canopy projected area, height, and canopy diameter, etc. And we will also test transferability of the workflow to large extent data and varying point densities. And we will also modify current method with the new cluster aggregation algorithm. So our next will go to Yifang for mapping 3D vegetation structure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chenhu.
Yeah. Yifang, please share your slides.
Yes. Hope you can see my screen now.
Yes, but you need to make it full screen. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Yifang. Today, I want to introduce mapping the spatial distribution of 3D vegetation structures. So after mapping individual trees, let's zoom out a little bit. Before I dive into how we do that, let's first understand why we want to map vegetation structure. So vegetation structure actually is one of the essential biodiversity variables. It is important for us to understand animal ecology, such as species habitat conditions, species distribution and their richness. And also it is important to have information on sustainable forest management. It is also contributes greatly for providing valuable input for biodiversity and ecosystem monitoring. Then the question is, why LiDAR? From our previous introduction by Daniel, you already maybe have an idea of all the advantages that LiDAR brings. It offers precise and spatially contiguous measurement, and it also has a capacity to penetrate through canopy, giving us information about the structure at understory and the terrain variations. LiDAR is also an active remote sensing technique, which make it complementary to other remote sensing data sources, such as Sentinel-2 or SAR data, or even other high-resolution optical imageries. And here is how point cloud looks like, compared to what you can see from Google Earth imageries. It captures objects on the Earth's surface and represents them in 3D point clouds. And then the question becomes, how can we characterize those complex 3D point clouds? From each raw point cloud, as already mentioned before, each point often have several attributes. Apart from X, Y, Z coordinates, we also have intensity, return number, or number of returns. Some of them have classification values or GPS time assigned to each point. And often we need to have some pre-processing steps. First is classification. If your dataset doesn't have any classification process done before, or you can have reclassification so that each point can be assigned to an object class that this point belongs to. If you have a very large LiDAR point files, you might need to retile it into smaller tiles, meaning you split it big ones into multiple small ones so that this can be easily handled by your available computing resources. Then when it comes to the normalization step, it is quite an essential step for actually capturing the actual vegetation height. As you can see here, we subtract the ground elevation from our point cloud. In this way, we basically can have the real vegetation height instead of the height with influence of terrain. And then we can calculate LiDAR metrics. LiDAR metrics are actually the measurements derived from point clouds that quantify the characteristics of vegetation structure. And often you need to define a geometry volume, like showing here, we define a grid cell with 10 meter by 10 meter resolution with indefinite Z value. So all the points within this geometry volume will be used for calculating metrics. And I will come back to the metrics calculation shortly. Eventually, we will have the metrics outputs. Those are the rasterized LiDAR metrics that you can easily use as input layers for your model. For example, you can have digital terrain model to capture the topographic characteristics and vegetation height or canopy cover or canopy openness. Those are the raster layers that can be directly used as input, for example, for species distribution modeling, land use land cover mapping, or machine learning algorithms for specific applications. So let's have a closer look of normalization step. I use an example from Spain because there you can directly see actually mountains and how does that influence the real height of the vegetation. In order to normalize the height of point clouds, you need to have a reference of terrain. One way of doing this is to generate a digital terrain model. There are different ways of generating a digital terrain model. And on the other hand, you can also directly interpolate the elevation of non-ground points using the exact position of ground points beneath it, as you can see here. But this way, you don't need a digital terrain model for normalization. The thing is, it can be more computational intensive because it needs to search for the exact points beneath the non-ground points. So now we normalize the points. What are the metrics that can be generated? There are three main categories. The first one is vegetation height. it is rather straightforward. We give this example again within 10 meter by 10 meter resolution grid cells, and you can see all the points within these grid cells will be used for calculation. And for this category, for example, maximum mean height of the vegetation will be generated. You can also calculate the different percentiles of normalized vegetation height. And the second category is vegetation cover. This category actually is a proportion matrix that calculates the ratio of the number of vegetation points within a given height layer to the total number of vegetation points within a cell. For instance, you can calculate the vegetation density within, for example, here, 2 to 3 meters. And basically, that is a quantification of how dense the vegetation occurs in this certain height layer. You can also calculate canopy cover, which means all the points above the mean height of the vegetation will be used as canopy points, and to calculate the ratio versus the total number of vegetation points. And the third category is vegetation vertical variability. So this is statistics that quantify the variation of the height of the points within a cell. For example, you can calculate a standard deviation of vegetation height, variance, and skewness of the vegetation height. There is also Shannon index. You can calculate, basically this is a matrix that represents the diversity of the height distribution within a certain cell. And for more details of the LiDAR matrix and how you actually calculate it, so regarding the formula and everything, please refer to the reference listed here. And as you can see from the example, we calculate the LiDAR matrix at 10 meter by 10 meter resolution. We actually can derive extra metrics at a larger scale because ecosystems actually have horizontal and vertical distribution, which is very important for species habitat and ecosystem functioning. For example, here at plot level, given an example of 100 meter by 100 meter area, you can already generate the edge extent of an forest patch. If you zoom out even further, you could even count the number of open patches within a kilometer by a kilometer area. So those are the derivatives you can generate from fine-scale LiDAR metrics. And data products of those LiDAR metrics at national scale actually can be used as input layer, as a base layer for deriving landscape metrics. Those are the important information that you can use, for example, if you want to map species distribution modeling at a national scale. So now we calculate LiDAR metrics. Before you use them, one crucial question is, are they really robust? And one of the most commonly discussed factors is point density, as already mentioned before. As you can see here, every time we have the point density, some of the details of the structure information get lost. And how does these metrics differ, calculating based on different density? In order to answer this question, we conduct a sensitivity analysis of LiDAR metrics in relation to the varying pulse densities across different habitats. Here we use pulse density because that is much more instrument dependent and reflects more direct on scan quality and conditions than point density. We also differentiate different habitats because each habitat, they have their unique vegetation structure. The reason we do this is we want to know if the sensitivity is actually habitat specific. What we found out is that almost all metrics in all habitats are robust. This is, of course, tested at, again, 10 meter resolution. However, there are some exceptions. For example, canopy cover and Shannon index has less robustness across all habitats. And there are some metrics actually perform worse in different habitats. For example, coefficient of variance of vegetation height it performs really poor if you calculate in grasslands and shrublands. And there are more LiDAR metrics calculated in grasslands actually show more variability towards a changing pulse density. A possible explanation for this would be because in grasslands you have much shorter vegetation, and whenever you lost the point density, it has much higher impact on the actual metrics calculation. You might lose important information by decreasing the pulse density. So after that, we know the robustness of those metrics. The next question is, what metrics are most essential for mapping ecosystem structure? We first test the correlation among those metrics, which give us the answer that all height metrics are highly correlated, as you can see in the upper left corner. And some metrics of cover and variability are also highly correlated with height metrics, such as entropy, which is a Shannon index mentioned before, and standard deviation of heights. And further, we conduct a principal component analysis among those 25 LiDAR metrics. What we discovered was the height metrics explains 55% of the variation among all the metrics, with the 75 percentile of normalized height contributes the most. And at second dimension, we have the cover metrics explains around 10% of the variation, with the metric of vegetation density between 3 to 4 meters contributes the most. So what we want to get from this test was it is suggested to choose a set of most representative yet less correlated metrics for our analysis to gain most insights of the structure information from different perspectives and avoid overfitting our model. I have to mention those tests were conducted as a countrywide LiDAR metrics in the Netherlands. So we didn't differentiate different habitats. If you conduct a similar test on one specific habitat, you might get different results. So that is worth trying before you actually use LiDAR metrics. And now we know more about the metrics. How can we use them? I want to give you one example that is using LiDAR metrics to help us understand the species distribution and their preferences on habitat structure. We focus on threatened butterflies. One is grassland species butterflies, and the other one is woodland species. You can see their preferred habitat in 3D point clouds. So what we did was we calculated a range of LiDAR metrics representing the density of vegetation at different layers, like lower than 1 meter, 1 to 5 meter, and 5 to 20, or even before 20 meter density. We also calculated several landscape metrics, such as open areas and open patches at edge extent. What we discovered is the importance of the open patches actually the openness patches actually play a quite important role in the occurrence of this grassland species. In the contrast, we can see that the middle to high layer of vegetation density and the edge extent of the forest, as you can see here, plays a more important role for the occurrence of the woodlands butterfly species. And another example I want to mention is, as mentioned before, if you have a laser scanner scanning a same area over the time, you might get a multi-temporal point cloud from which you can observe the dynamics of structural change. We did the analysis using agent 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So over the past 2 decades, we observed an area here that you can see clearly forest cuts in 2018. And in 2020, more further deforestation happened here. And in 2023, you already can observe some regrowth of the vegetation, which directly can be observed at LiDAR metrics that we calculated. For example, here, the density between 2 to 3 meters, you can see the increase over the years. And of course, if you see the height, you have such high decrease here. So those are the examples I give. Some take-home message today. First, airborne LiDAR provides detailed information on vegetation structure across spatial scales. And then landscape metrics can be derived from fine-scale LiDAR metrics and can be used for regional or even national modeling. And most LiDAR metrics are robust towards varying point density, but some metrics have more variability in specific habitats. And LiDAR offers great potential for predictive habitat distribution modeling. And last but not least, multi-temporal LiDAR data capture ecosystem structure dynamics that we can use this for the long-term ecosystem monitoring. Thanks for your attention. This is the end of my presentation. Now I would like to hand over to my colleague Jinhu again, and he will talk about the trial networks mapping of large herbivores. Thanks.
Thank you, Yifeng. Jinhu, can you share your slides? Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So my second talk is on delineation of radial trails in reed beds with airborne LiDAR data. Yeah. To begin with, so it all started with herbivores as ecosystem engineers. So in many nature reserves in Europe, large herbivores like the reindeer, horses, and cattle were introduced to shape the landscape by grazing, browsing, and trampling. So they create significant changes in the landscape. So the consequences are first and most visibly the created trails. As these animals moved between feeding areas or water sources and resting spots, they created a network of paths through the vegetation. They also result in fragmented reed beds of vegetations and create new open patches. These physical changes have direct impact on biodiversity. So, for instance, the trails fragment habitats, and this influence some of the breeding birds. This brings to that delineating these trails is essential to quantitatively evaluate their impact on ecosystem and biodiversity. Yeah. So traditional mapping methods are quite difficult and often inefficient. So first, manual mapping is often not feasible since these areas are generally inaccessible on foot due to marsh terrain or extremely dense vegetation. And also, the trails sometimes invisible from 2D aerial photos due to those trails are beneath the canopy of vegetation. Also, trying to apply these methods for large-scale mapping is simply impractical. So, since LiDAR pulse penetrated through gaps of vegetation canopy and reach to the lower layers and terrain, we hypothesize that trails are typically linear features. They can be effectively delineated from airborne LiDAR data. Our study area is in Netherlands, Oostwaarderplassen. It's a Natura 2000 site and has a marsh area around 36 square kilometers and grassland area around 20 square kilometers. Cattle and horses were introduced in 1983, 1984, and red deer were introduced in 1992. For the red deer, they walk across the grassland and marshland boundary to look for shrubs and trees to forage on. This image shows the situation. The orange line denotes the boundary of grassland and marshland, and the red arrow denotes the way the red deer enters the marsh area. So, and they created this magnificent network of trails in the marsh area. The consequences of the red deer in reed beds in marsh area at least have three aspects. First, they alter the vertical vegetation structure. They trample the reed beds, and they also create vegetation patches. They fragmented the reed bed vegetation, as the image shows, and they also affect breeding some birds. Some birds favor higher density vegetation, but others favor lower densities. And so to delineate those trails, we introduce this workflow, which consists of 4 major steps, which are pre-processing, trail filtering, reconstruct DTMs, and trail extraction. The input is the original airborne LiDAR data. In the pre-processing step, the original point cloud were first retiled to appropriate tiles, and then followed by clipping to the boundary of the study area. Then some outliers were removed. The second step is near trail filtering. So we used an iterative way to reduce the size of grids and gradually refine the terrain. As denoted by this solid line, we then applied a height threshold to segment near trail points and the vegetation points. The images on the right show the point cloud data visualization before and after trail filtering. Before filtering, you can merely see the trails, but after you can see clearly part of the trails. The next step is the DTM was generated based on the obtained near trail points, which with a given resolution, the inverse distance weighted interpolation was employed to obtain the height of grids. As the figure in the middle shows the obtained near trail points are just discrete 3D points, and the rightmost image shows the generated DTM, also colorized by the height from highest to lowest by red to blue. Then the next step is to using Laplacian smoothing to obtain differentiated DTMs for different iterations, and then a statistical threshold applied to obtain the initial trails. And then for clustering steps, the initial trail points were input, and a spatial neighborhood clustering step is performed to group the trail points into clusters. And then the next step is using tensor voting to obtain the obtained clusters. So first, the neighboring geometric structure around a point in 3D can be represented by an ellipsoid. So here. For example, on the image left, the query point in red, and all the neighboring points within this radius are in green. And this ellipsoid can be equally represented as a generic second-order symmetric tensor, noted by this symbol M. This stress M can further be decomposed into like stick tensor, plant tensor, and ball tensors. So those tensor components represent different features. For example, the stick tensor represents linear feature, and the plate tensor represents planar feature, and the ball tensor represents scatter or some silicious features. Next step is, for example, the trail points, just like typically as linear features, in the neighborhood. So, and the obtained results in cluster step also have some defects. For example, they have many isolated points, and also there are gaps, and also many of them have no linear clusters. So then next step is using stick tensor to aggregate the trail points by using their linear feature in the neighborhood. To do this, we I'll say by casting the linearity value from the voter to its neighboring points. In this image, you can see the voter is denoted by the red point, and its linearity is encapsulated as a stick tensor, so which is denoted by the green arrow. The voting direction in its neighboring points is determined by rotating the stick tensor with regard to the relative position of the voter and the votee. Votee is the location where is the neighboring point receiving these votes. And the voting weight is obtained by such a voting field. The voting field is modeled by the relative angle and the distance to the voter. If it is further with regard to the voter, the weight will have lower. And if it's next to or closer to the voter, the weight will higher. So next step is to accumulate the votes from the neighboring points at each voting location. The linear features at the right image, you can see each voting point will have the linear feature, and the first casting direction to its neighbors, and then for the neighboring points as will accumulate the votes. Then finally, we can aggregate the trail points. Next, I will show the results from the marsh area in Ostwater Plaza. So this is the overall area of the extracted trails. I will show a zoomed-in example area. So first, after Laplacian smoothing, you can see most of the initial candidate trails are obtained. And after spatial clustering, you could see still some isolated small clusters. And after test voting, all the trails can be extracted. So to validate our workflow, so we created this validation data. So all the input data is for this workflow is around 500 million points, and we placed 100 of 30 meter by 30 meter square plots in the study area, and the study areas have two different grazing level. The area denoted in pink is reindeer grazing only, and in green is reindeer and geese grazing. And a total of 9 million points were labeled as green, and we use the accuracy as metric. And for the overall accuracy, the area of reindeer grazing only accuracy is around 93%, and the area of reindeer and geese grazing is around 90%. And also the source code is available here. To conclude, we say trails created by reindeer in reed beds habitats can be delineated by airborne LiDAR data. And Laplacian smoothing method use the topographic shape of trails, but not the linearity feature from the trail. Then spatial 3D test voting encodes the linearity or linear feature to aggregate the trails. But still, there have difficulties exist for test voting in dense trail areas, since these trails have local planar feature. Last one is that this workflow requires specialized knowledge on point cloud data processing. So for the future work, we will apply this workflow to different LiDAR datasets. So for example, multi-temporal data or other study areas. We are now also testing deep learning-based methods for trail delineation. Next step, also we will adapt this workflow to extract other linear features. We have two examples. Firstly, the stone wall extraction in Malta, and the second one is tree line extraction in New Zealand. Thanks for your attention. And next, I will go to Daniel for wrap up.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Then I'll go to share my final presentation. So in these final slides, I would like to simply wrap up a bit and show you some of the resources that are associated with the presentations today. First of all, I would like to say that if you're interested in using airborne laser scanning data and analyzing LiDAR data, there's a number of softwares available. If you are familiar with R, then I would highly recommend the LiDAR package, which provides a wonderful tool to get started. There's also other tools like LAS tools and Cloud Compare that are very good for visualization and processing small amounts of data. So for instance, if you have particular study sites or landscapes. Not all of this is open source, but many of those things are open source. The challenge is if you're getting into much larger data sets, for instance, countrywide analysis, the processing can be very challenging. And typically this software does not provide reproducible end-to-end workflows for processing such massive amounts of data, for instance, multi-terabyte point clouds. So we have been working in the last couple of years together with the eScience Center on developing a new software, which is called this Laser Chicken software. This is the software behind the vegetation structure metric calculations that Yifang has been introducing. This software is an open source Python tool, which is specifically focused on extracting these statistical properties, or let's say vegetation metrics, from 3D point clouds. Here are a number of features that are calculated. These basically correspond to a large extent to those vegetation metrics that Yifang has been introducing. The software is specifically designed for efficient, scalable, and distributed processing of large data sets. So for instance, calculating analysis at a countrywide scale. There's a user manual, source code, and tutorial in Jupyter Notebooks available. Based on this Laser Chicken software, we have then further developed a workflow which we call laser farm. And this laser farm workflow builds on the laser chicken software for the feature extraction or this metric calculation, but it also extends it to an end-to-end workflow where you have a retiling component, a normalization component, a feature extraction or metric calculation component, and a rasterization, so that in the end get geotiff files out that you can easily handle in R or GIS software. So this is a reproducible end-to-end workflow with a number of steps. It's also designed for efficient, scalable, and distributed computing of large amounts of data, and it's available also in Python as a Jupyter notebook. A few other examples that I have just put here on the slide from the presentations today. So the tree individualization that Jinhoo was talking about is C++ code available on GitHub. We have a number of examples for processing countrywide or multi-site LiDAR data sets, Jupyter notebooks, for instance, for our Dutch AHN data sets, and also laser farm applications for various European demonstration sites. We have the trail extraction workflow as a C++ code also available from Jinhoo's work on the trail extraction available on GitHub. And then we have some specific code that also allows you to retile and clip large tiles that you can typically get from these airborne laser scanning portals to smaller studies areas that you may be interested to work on. And finally, we have this code on the robustness assessment that Yifang was talking, also available on GitHub. We have produced a number of data sets that maybe are interesting for you depending on where you come from. So here's a data set that we have produced from a number of European demonstration sites, 7 in total across 5 countries, where we have calculated those vegetation metrics as examples. In this case, we had 35 metrics at 10-meter resolution, and they cover different types of habitats from forests to reed beds and grasslands. And here's a few examples for one of the study sites. So typically they can give you, based on some of those metrics, quite nice information on, for instance, tree lines or hedges or tall vegetation in the landscape and so on. We have extended this work also to a whole country level. This is one example for the 3rd Dutch airborne laser scanning campaign, where we have calculated those metrics at 10-meter resolution for the whole country, produced geotiff files, and those LiDAR metrics are then can be easily incorporated into GIS or R software, so that you don't need to deal with the 3D point cloud. Most recently, we have extended this from the AHN3 to also other AHN data sets, AHN1, 2, 4, so those that are currently available. And we have provided a number of auxiliary data sets at the same resolution so that you can deal with some of the challenges and biases. For instance, we have layers of point density, we have layers of pulse density, we have flight timestamp information, which gives you the idea of when a particular area was actually flown, so that you can either also compare within the country when the information in a season was obtained. We have digital terrain models, digital surface models, and a number of masks that help you to omit areas like buildings, road, water, power lines, or areas where there is no information available. And finally, the data sets from the trails that Jinhoo was talking about and the ground truth data are also available on GitHub and Zenodo. I want to highlight just a few recent publications. If you're interested in the topics that we have been talking about, I would recommend here the synthesis paper in ecological indicators, which provides a lot of insights into how habitat condition metrics can be derived from airborne laser scanning, but also from drones. So we're covering both here. The paper of publication from Yifang about the multi-temporal high-resolution data products that we have produced, and basically, finally, the workflow paper from Jinhoo introducing these ungulate trails in wetland that he has extracted. 3 examples of ecological applications. Here's this example of the butterflies, of how to use vegetation metrics to derive information of modeling butterflies and their habitats. The middle one is a review summarizing a lot of the literature, different ways of calculating metrics that can be used in bird diversity or species distribution research. And then finally, a paper that shows how LiDAR data can be used to look into niche separation, for instance, of closely related species, just as examples of ecological applications. So this was basically the webinar that we wanted to give today, showing you some examples of how you can use airborne laser scanning data for ecological applications. I want to highlight that we are planning an in-person 3 to 4 day workshop at the beginning of next year, probably in February, where we want to work specifically on scaling up LiDAR workflows for ecological applications across Europe. If you're interested in this, please contact us or leave your details, your full name and your the detailed course in the chat, and we can also inform you once the registration information is available. So with this, I would like to thank you very much for your interest. I would like to thank the speakers, and I hope that you have obtained a number of interesting insights into this topic. We will be available for the next 15 to 30 minutes in case there are questions. This will be after this webinar now, but I'm now stopping the recording, and I hope and I wish you a nice day. Thank you very much.